Tonight, when you hear a twig snap outside your window, ask yourself, is it just the wind? Or is it something that's been practicing silence longer than humans have existed? These stories aren't campfire tales, they're warnings. Sleep with one eye open. Under the weight of a sky bruised by twilight, Chris sat alone on the concrete steps of his ranger station in southeastern Pennsylvania, a place he had called his professional home for years. The summer of 2007 had been typical, filled with tranquil hikes and dreaded paperwork. That particular night, the forest whispered nothing but routine until the silence bent under the strange weight of a presence. It was not sound that unsettled Chris, it was instinct, a primal itch that gnawed at the edges of his awareness. Someone was watching him. He turned instinctively, first towards the darkened office where only he and his supervisor, Mike, were working late. Mike had gone to the tool shed down the access road just 15 minutes earlier, saying he'd be back shortly. But now, sitting alone under the pale moonlight, Chris felt eyes crawling over his skin. He scanned the empty parking lot and the gnarled tree line beyond, but saw no movement. Still, the sensation remained, a cold prickling at the nape of his neck that refused to leave. This was no paranoia born from solitude. Chris was a veteran of the woods, not the type to be shaken by shadows. But tonight felt wrong. Determined to reassure himself, he walked into the parking lot, past empty vehicles, down toward the black wall of forest. The moon offered little comfort, merely casting long claws of light across the gravel. He stood 10 meters from the forest's edge, searching, waiting. No branches broke, no leaves shifted. He was alone, or so it seemed. With unease simmering beneath his breath, Chris turned to retreat. And then it happened. A sound tore through the air, sharp and cutting, a whooshing like a thrown tomahawk slicing past his ear. He dove instinctively, crashing to the ground, heart galloping inside his chest. The missile, whatever it had been, came from the woods, but the source remained hidden. Crawling back to his feet, Chris scanned the area. Nothing. He searched the ground, trying to find the object thrown at him, but it had vanished. And with no time or courage left to probe deeper, he fled into the office and locked the doors. When Mike finally returned, headlights slicing through the dark like blades, he was pale and sweating. Chris rushed to greet him, ready to tell his own tale of invisible assailants and flying projectiles, but Mike looked shattered. The story that unfolded next only deepened the mystery. Mike had felt it too, the watching, the dread. While alone at the shed, he'd experienced a wave of pure instinctual terror, as if something malevolent were lurking just beyond the trees. He'd heard footsteps, heavy and deliberate, crossing behind him, and just before jumping into his truck, he glimpsed a hooded figure vanishing into the forest, calm, almost surgical in its retreat. That night, they barricaded themselves in the office, eyes wide and unblinking until dawn broke. No one came, but something had. Something had watched, had thrown, had stalked. They filed a report, told the other rangers. But the forest stayed quiet after that, eerily so, as if whatever it was had moved on, or worse, was simply waiting for another opportunity. 8 years later, in Utah's dark canyon wilderness, another silent hunter awakened. Paul, a young backpacker on the final day of his solo trek, found himself dehydrated and encumbered by a heavy pair of elk antlers he had strapped to his pack. The added weight drained him fast, forcing him to stop short of his destination. He found a stagnant puddle of water and set up camp nearby, planning to boil it for drinking. But reason prevailed, and he left his gear behind to climb the rocky slope, searching for cleaner water. He found a small spring half a mile away and drank deeply, only to realize his water bottles were still at camp. The return trip should have been simple, but something shifted. The air thickened, his skin crawled, and each step toward camp felt like walking into an unseen snare. The woods were quiet, too quiet, yet every gust of wind or crunch of gravel made his heart pound. When he reached the camp, he hesitated, should he go back for the water? Logic said yes, but his gut screamed no. Paul returned, stick in hand like a makeshift club, and filled his bottles. But on the trail back, something halted him. A fresh mountain lion track was pressed between his own. An apex predator had been tailing him, walking in his footsteps, silent and invisible in the underbrush. The antlers must have confused the beast, made Paul appear like prey. He sprinted back to camp, dove into his tent, and waited through the night, listening to the forest hold its breath. The lion never struck, but Paul knew it had come close, very close, and only the fragile line of instinct had kept him alive. In April of 2020, the haunted chorus of isolation reached its crescendo in the Superstition Mountains of Arizona. 17-year-old Sam, brimming with youthful confidence and an experienced hiker's arrogance, decided to make a solo overnight trip through an 8-mile canyon trail. He arrived late, too late. The sun was already dying when he started, but stubbornness won. He thought he'd reach a safe spot to camp, but darkness swallowed him faster than expected. When he finally found a clearing to stop for the night, it was more necessity than choice. He was ill-equipped for paranoia. Sam preferred the raw touch of nature, opting for a sleeping bag beneath a tarp rather than the safety of a tent. As he sat eating canned beans by the fire, something shifted in the air. A tension, a weight. He felt it not as fear but as alertness. His senses sharpened. And then the marble-sized rock fell from the darkness and landed silently at his feet. He scanned the forest, but the shadows gave nothing back. Rational thoughts tried to win. Maybe the rock fell from a tree, or maybe he kicked it earlier. But the firelight painted a 5-foot circle around him. Beyond that was unknowable dark. Still, nothing else happened, and eventually Sam convinced himself it was nothing. He climbed into his bag and let sleep take him. But sleep abandoned him quickly. He woke again, dread recoiling around his gut. There were sounds this time, soft footsteps in dry leaves, circling the edge of the clearing. He reached for his flashlight. Gone. It had been right next to him, within inches. Now it was missing. Panic crept into his throat. He scanned wildly and spotted it. The flashlight was lying on the ground 10 meters away, in the exact direction of the footsteps. That meant someone had crept right next to him while he slept and taken it. Sam didn't move. He didn't fall for the bait. He knew it was a trap. Instead, he stoked the fire, gripping his sharp object. Hours passed like lifetimes. He would hear the soft crunch of footsteps every so often, always staying just out of sight. The pattern was clear. When the fire dimmed, the steps crept closer. When the fire blazed, they retreated. At 3 a.m., the firewood was gone, and so was any hope of light. The steps returned, this time stopping just 3 meters away, hidden behind the thickest pine trunks. Sam could hear the breathing, feel the presence, but he dared not investigate. He stood his ground until the dawn peeled back the darkness, and with it, the menace retreated. The sun rose, but the horror remained burned into his mind. He packed his gear and fled, hiking nonstop until he reached his car 20 miles away. At the first gas station he found, he finally exhaled. But what greeted him next turned the chill permanent. On the dusty back window of his vehicle, traced by a human finger, were 2 words and a punctuation mark that twisted reality into nightmare. Sleep well. 3 stories, 3 different men, same predator. Not in form, not in species, not even in time, but in nature. It stalks. It watches. It waits. The question remains, what lives in the space between rationality and instinct? And will you listen when your body screams before your mind understands? Now ask yourself, have you ever felt watched? When no one was there, would you have followed your flashlight into the trees? What would you do if your instinct screamed, but your mind said, it's nothing? Are we ever truly alone in the wilderness? Share your thoughts in the comments. We want to know what you believe. And if this story left you unsettled, subscribe now, because next time the woods might be watching you.